let's make a start.
Okay. Let's do it, Sven.
So a little bit of Zoom etiquette. Everyone's on mute, which is very good. Feel free to use the chat function as you all are, and we're welcoming questions. Hopefully Emma will answer a lot of questions to be asked during the session. But feel free to post them in the chat, and hopefully we can get to all of them towards the end. And if we don't, we'll follow up. So first things first, acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all gathering on or sitting on or at. And in Perth, for Perth folks, and I know that we've got some people from over east, that's the Whadjuk people, and we'd like to pay our respects to their elders past and present. So, community insight. We've been working with Emma now for about 12 months formally, but we actually met about 5 years ago when Impact Seed started, and she's the founder of Community Insight, and she pitched at our first pitch event back in early 2016. And now, several years later, she's working with us on impact and outcomes measurement and has been involved in a number of projects. And we've been looking at how do we do impact planning better. The core of what Impact Seed does is impact measurement and management alongside social enterprise development and impact investment. And one of the important aspects of impact management is proper planning. So over the last 6 months, we've been working with Emma on how do we more closely align what this great tool that she's built in Community Insight Australia and the work that we do at Impact Seed. And what we arrived at in late March was a merger between the both of us. So now we're fully in the same boat and very thrilled to be as well. So there's a lot of different approaches and data sources for impact planning. And this platform has got a whole abundance of them, and normally we do demos one-on-one, and we welcome you all to get in touch with us if you'd like a one-on-one demo to look very specifically at the types of data that you're looking for. But today we'll be looking at some of the data that you're interested in and the types of data that you registered your interest in through the booking process. And I think I sent that out yesterday along with the meeting reminder. There was a very broad survey. I think everything was very popular, from education, skills, data across communities, unemployment, business data, Centrelink data was very popular, and that's something that I'm sure Emma will be diving into. And then also renters, homelessness, and health data. So on that note, and without further ado, I will hand over to Emma, who will now share her screen and give you a bit of an overview on the platform.
Great, thanks, Ben. So what I'm going to do to start with is just give you a very quick summary of the Community Insight Australia tool, and then I'm going to jump into the software and show you how I might do an investigation of a place and how that place might be affected, particularly over the next few months. So, so the whole idea of this software is that there's a vast amount of data out there, and it's generally published in something that looks like this. Some of us are very familiar with these ABS spreadsheets, but for most people working in social services, having to look at something like this says, all right, I'm just going to call a friend, ask for an anecdotal piece of evidence from on the ground and move on. So what we have tried to do is say, for everyone who's making decisions that are important to people, and particularly place-based decisions, what we're going to do is we're going to get all these spreadsheets and put them in the back end and push them out through a map. Now, you'll see it says publicly available data there. There's no sort of secret or sensitive information in this tool. It's all information that is already published publicly, so you don't have to check with anybody else whether you can use and reuse it. Although we do like to say, do check back at the source before you make any massive decisions based on it, just to be sure. So the idea of this, it's an interface, and if you can read Google Maps, you should be able to access all of the publicly available data that we have about Australians. So in the back end of the tool, we have over 500 data sets. Probably the basis of the tool is the census data, but then we also have Centrelink data, for example, the New Start recipients. We have the Australian Early Development Census, which is done nationally with children in their first year of school. We have some data from the NDIA, so we have NDIS participants, and we have quite a lot of health data that's we've been seeing recently, a lot more publication of health data. So we have things like life expectancy, immunisation rates, and a heap more. So the power of this tool is really that you can define an area. And once you've defined that area, the tool pulls all the data for that area together. So here's an area that's been defined. If we're looking at a data set, say age 0 to 4, we can get the percent of the population that is age 0 to 4 and a ballpark figure for some areas that were defined, as you've just seen. And I know when I was working in planning policy, one of the most difficult things was that sort of ballpark estimate. How many people might you be dealing with if you put a program in a certain place? The tool also has a dashboard feature that we'll look into more, so that you can compare different areas across a number of indicators, and then a report. And I will give you a copy of a report soon, but this is an over 60, the report's over 60 pages. It pulls together all of those 500 indicators into one document, and it does that within 10 minutes. So one further thing that this tool can do is to map data that our users might upload. So this user here has mapped, this is a local council, and they've mapped a number of services in their local area. So what I'm going to do now is jump across to the tool itself. So sorry for those of you who are not in Perth, but we are going to be a little bit Perth-centric today. So let's say, just to start with, I'm thinking, okay, so for the sake of an example, I'm an organisation that has a presence in Belmont, Armidale and Midland, but I'm interested generally in what I'm going to see over the next few months. So this is I'm a service that works with young families. And just to start with, I'm going to look at the Siefer index of relative disadvantage. We generally find that this is the Siefer index people use the most. So now I've got some colours on a map here. And by opening my info box, I can see what's going on here. Now, this data says it's published down to SA1 level, but it's showing areas at SA2 level. And I think the best way to talk about these definitions, so SA means standard area. So we're looking at standard area 2, and you can see it's about suburb size. So if we look at these sorts of, it's probably just a little bit bigger than definitions for suburbs. But let's say I zoom in, and I'm going to zoom in here over Rivervale. Now I can see I'm showing areas at SA1 level. So the census data and some other ABS data sets are published at SA1 level, and this is the most granular level. This is what the tool is based on. And you can see that in sort of densely populated city areas, these are sort of several blocks. The average number of people in an SA1 is 400. So that's not 400 households, it's 400 people. So I can see, if I click on About the Indicator, I get some more information on what the Siefer index of disadvantage is. I can see that it was published in 2016, with our next update expected to be out in March 2023. So I'm just going to show you. So let's say, so I've got my service up here in Belmont, and I'm thinking, so I'm wondering who's going to start rocking up. Are we going to see more families in need? So can you see up in the top right, there's a little black box, and right at the end of the little black box is a number. And now what that is as I move my mouse, it is the index of relative disadvantage. So this here, I've got a 9, and that means that 9% of the SA1s in Australia are more disadvantaged than this little area I found in Rivervale, and 91% of areas in Australia are less disadvantaged or more advantaged. So I'm already thinking, okay, I've got a little area of interest in here, and I want to know more about these people. So what I'm going to do is define an area. So this is really the cool thing about this tool. I'm going to add a custom area, and I'm going to add Rivervale. I'm going to use the suburb today and put it in my COVID investigation. Now, you can define any area in Australia. You can draw it on a map, or you can choose a suburb, a postcode, LGA, state, and SA3, which is usually a region of around 15 SA2s, and SA2 or SA1. So I'm doing Rivervale, the suburb, and in a minute, I shall search for it and save it. So what this means is that now here's my investigation, and here are my communities that I'm interested in. I'm going to request a report, and that will be available within 10 minutes. So one way we can compare the areas is, just going to go back. Now we can look at a dashboard. So I mentioned this before. I'm just going to restrict this to the areas we're interested in. So we're in Armidale, Midland, Belmont, and Rivervale. Now, organisations that subscribe to the tool can choose their which indicators they want along the top, but I want to just have a little look at these and think about what they mean at the moment. So Rivervale is still uploading. Okay, I might actually, we need to give that another minute. Actually, that's all right. We can talk through a few things. So, so what we have here, if we think about the sorts of things that we might be interested in when we're looking at a community. I think the Siefer indexes are always a really good broad brush to get an idea. Mental health hospitalisations are a great data set that's fairly new. So that gives us, there's also more granular data on mental health. We have children who are developmentally vulnerable, so children who may be affected by disruptions in schooling, people on New Start allowance. We've got median rental payment here. So for households that are paying rent, how much per week is that? We may be interested in rental households. So here I've highlighted renting from a real estate agent or a person not in the same household. And I've done that instead of the rented total, because people who are renting, now I've got Rivervale up, people who are renting from state or territory housing authority may have more protections in place when it comes to COVID. So if we're looking at Rivervale, what we can see here is that they have a very high proportion of renters, although Midland is actually even higher, but they definitely have the highest rental payments. So coming across here, we've got our median weekly household income. People in Rivervale generally bring home a lot more money than those in our other areas, particularly Midland, but they're paying more rent. So let's just have not in the labour force is a really interesting data set. We can see here, you'd think, oh, Armidale. So Rivervale is generally 42.7. It's the least disadvantaged area of the four. Armidale, the most disadvantaged. But if we come across here, we can see that Armidale has a 40%. It has a high proportion of people who are not in their workforce to start with. It has a high proportion of people already on our New Start allowance. So in terms of people affected by changes in the economy, the Armidale itself may be a little almost buffered by their sort of already a strong relationship with government supports and payments, and a much lower proportion renting from private landlords. But over here is where we start seeing what might be happening in Rivervale. So accommodation and food services, Rivervale's up at 9.5%, much higher than Armidale, only slightly higher than Midland. Also, people in arts and recreation have been heavily affected by the lockdown, and we can see Belmont and Rivervale both high there. And if we're looking at retail trade, we expect that Armidale and Midland would be quite highly affected. So this is just the dashboard is a very good sort of quick overview that we can use to compare the communities. I might just jump back into the map and just show you some of the kinds of health data that we have.
Emma, I'm not sure if you seen the chat, but there was a question about rent assistance data through Centrelink.
Oh, hang on a minute. Okay, I'm not going to read the chat because that I could.
It was just on whether there's rent assistance data through the Centrelink data.
I haven't seen any. It's not in the set that we download, and I'm not sure if it's available, but I will make a note of that. But yeah, it's not in the, all of the data we have from Centrelink comes in one package. There may be another package available. The thing is, because this data is, because the data that is available is opened up so frequently, we do have to keep going back to check. So I'll check on that one. Let's just have a look in health. So what we can see in, you can see here we've got sort of prevalence in the community. So we can have diabetes prevalence, and we also have deaths from diabetes. So there are several ways you can investigate. Let's jump to Rivervale for health of a community. So health data is published at a much higher level. So you'll see these areas are quite high, and they don't, you can't dive into them like you can the census data. So we can see that in this whole area, we have, this is a, so each of these colours is 20% of Australia. So this is in the 20% most sort of worst area in Australia for deaths from respiratory system disease. So we've got that kind of overlaid on it as well. What I'm going to do now is see if I pop back to reports, I should see my Rivervale area profile in there. And if I click on here, I can download it. Now, what I'm going to do for you today is put a link into the chat box. So if you all go to chat, you'll see a link there. If you copy and paste it into a browser, your computer will download a Word document. That will be a 60-page plus Word document. So if you don't want that document, don't do it. It won't, I don't think it will work if you just click on it. I think you will have to copy and paste it. That seems to be the thing in Zoom that we've discovered. So can I just have a sense, is that working for everybody? Yeah, yeah, I've had a thumbs up. So if that has worked for you, you should be able to see what I can see. So what this is it's a report. The idea is it's written in plain English so anyone can understand. It's a Word document, so I can select the entire thing and change the font and colours to match the style guide of my organisation. And I can copy and paste without any difficulty into other documents. So as I said before, this is publicly available information. The idea behind this is that people use and reuse this information often. We want this to be a site that's easy to come to. People are grabbing information and just using, you know, even if it's only 2 or 3 more data points in every decision we make, being able to include that extra evidence should make us more effective service providers. So when we just jump in, if we're on the second page, we get to see a nice overview. Rivervale, not too different to the average for Western Australia on many of these statistics. Now I'm just going to scroll down. Once we get into this population section, we can start getting a feel start getting a feeling of the people that live there. So in the suburb of Rivervale, we're looking at about 10,000 people, and so we're looking to understand them. A median age of 33 is younger than the WA average, so it's a fairly young suburb. If I'm running a service for children, I can see here I've got 875 families with dependent children, and there's about 1,400 children below the age of 15. My working age population is very high. And you can see here 76% of our population is working age in Rivervale compared to 66 or 67 for WA. So when I have a look at the population pyramid, so what we've done with these reports is we try to make a few key facts that people might just be able to take out and put straight into their documents, as well as some charts that are how we would display the data if we were trying to use it in a document. So here you can see most populations don't look like this, don't have this big spike of 25 to 34-year-olds. What we have here is a lot of these sort of young working people in Rivervale, and you can see down this end, or if we jump right over, I've actually got more children aged 0 to 4 than I do aged 5 to 9. So these young people have young families. So when I expect these families to rock up, I think, we are dealing in Rivervale with, around 650 kids who are under 5. So I thought there was, okay. I just want you to jump now to page 19. I'm just going to have a quick scroll down here. Okay, so down on page 19, I'm looking at Centrelink payments, and I can see that there are 395 people in this area who are on New Start. That is slightly lower than the WA average, but that's a number that I'll be watching and would expect to increase over this time. Now, if we jump to page 41, let's see. And I am aware that I've lost some of you as you get stuck in the data, and that's fine. Just, it's so interesting, isn't it? Sometimes when you look at it, you just think, oh, well, you could burrow down into much of this data. But that's fine, do your own thing or come along with me. So I'm on page 41 and I'm looking at tenure and landlord data. So here I can see that in Rivervale, we have much fewer people owning their own home and a lot more people renting. So we're almost double the WA average on renting. Only 672 homes are owned outright. So of my 10,000, just over 1,000 are owned with a mortgage. So then again, remembering we're dealing with about 10,000 homes. We've got, 10,000 people. Not sure on what page. There's around 4,000 dwellings. I'm not sure where I got that from. Maybe I added these up. But we're looking at about 4,000 dwellings for River Vale. So what we can see here is that more than half of those are rented, which is very high. And when we look, then more than half of those rented dwellings are rented through a real estate agent. So this is a really important indicator of families that might be under financial stress at the moment, that we're dealing with mortgages and rented rental properties. I'm now, sorry, I'm just going to jump up, and we can now, just on page 39, I've just gone up a couple of pages, and we can see that our median mortgage repayment is almost $2,000 a month, and our median rent payment is $350 a week. So if people are getting by on their job keeper allowances, then that median rent payment is taking up more than half of that allowance, which is fairly significant. So now we're going to flick down to, so we do have some information on education. So if we head down to page number 49, page 49, we're looking at when how much school people completed. And you can see here that while you have just over 5,000 people who've completed Year 12 or equivalent, you've got almost half that amount who didn't make it to that final year of school. And then almost half of that again, and over half of that again, only getting to Year 10. So we're not looking at the, sort of the most educated area. So keeping that in mind, now we'll have a look at industries of employment. And if we head right down to page 58, we can have a look at industries of employment. So I'm hoping that that even though this writing is small, you can see it. If you're struggling to see this on your screen, then the page above might be, page 57 might be slightly easier, but I'm going to stick with this chart because I think it's quite, it's quite revealing. So our WA average is in the light blue and River Vale is in the dark blue. So what we can see is for River Vale, we're much higher on this accommodation and food services. We are much fewer in education and training, not much in manufacturing. And when we get down to retail, actually our retail slightly lower than the state average, and arts and recreation is over here. So we've got our 2.7% compared to our 1.6. So we can see that we've got a bunch of people here that are likely to be affected. So I think that's all I'm going to guide you through at the moment. Is this is this a good time to stop and take questions?
Yeah. So there's really only a couple that have come so far, and I thought that maybe Kelly could ask hers live, because it seems like it's probably better asked directly. So Kelly, do you want to unmute yourself and just pipe up?
Hi, thanks guys. Hey, can you hear me?
Hi Kelly, yeah.
Okay. Katie just responded in the chat, which was helpful for another tip, but my question was about utilising this data in a community development context. So a lot of the work that I do starts out with a strengths-based approach, so having a look at, you know, existing resources and social capital across a community SA1/2 level, and then I guess overlaying that then where there might be gaps or needs or opportunities. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on using it in that way, and if you know of any examples, particularly probably in the UK.
I don't know of a social capital data set here as such. So Kelly, when you're mapping social capital, what do you, at SA1, SA2, what data are you using?
So that's interesting, because I don't actually think there is necessarily that data available. It's more about overlays of particular resource data where I can get it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and in the way I'm talking about social capital too, sometimes it sounds silly, but sometimes I have to create and adapt my own profiles, because I capture the uncounted or the unformalized social capital networks, such as partnerships or collaborative networks, which are really valuable, but it's hard to kind of sometimes intersect and overlay with data sets, and I end up kind of playing with it almost, because if I'm articulating need or value or a rationale, then it's kind of got to be a little bit more tailored to the arena I'm working in.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just wondering if there were any examples out there, and someone gave a tip about one which I'll look up later. But I guess in the context of COVID and moving forward, I guess we've seen emphasis of the value in social capital such as that, in the formal and the informal. And with rebuilding community and resilience moving forward, that kind of plays quite a crucial role for the connection of communities online and in face-to-face, and how strong they are.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things there. Firstly, people are starting to create more useful, interesting, and varied data sets. So we are constantly updating and uploading new data. But as well as that, we have the capacity in the tool for you to upload your own data. So often we find, no matter how much is out there, what organisations are always doing is putting it all together and coming up with something that is meaningful to them. All our subscribers have the ability to upload data at suburb, postcode, LGA, and SA2 and SA3 level. I just published yesterday or the day before, we saw someone publish a COVID sort of health risk index. So this is something completely new, developed in response to the latest information. And once that data is made public, we can upload that straight away. In terms of examples in the UK, this tool was actually developed in the UK by housing providers, and it is still primarily used by housing providers. So one of the things that they have done is they map their housing stock, and we were talking to an organisation that has 11,000 homes. And one of the things that they've done is they said they always manage their homes sort of line by line on a spreadsheet. And when they got this tool, they created neighbourhoods of homes. And now when they do work to support, so they all have sort of big community services, sort of branches to support their tenants. When they do their support work, they do it in neighbourhoods. So they'll say, like everyone living in this area comes to whether it's employment support or, all the different types of workshops they run. They've started running them in neighbourhoods, and they say that makes just a massive difference to the way they approach their housing stock and the people within them, and also to the people who live there.
Yeah, that's really useful to know, because sometimes it's how we connect the community services and the community services funder arena to the local level in terms of leveraging and partnerships and opportunities. So that's handy. So thanks for answering my question.
Welcome. Thank you, Kelly. Anybody else?
Brooke had a question about comparing data sets. Where is it? Do you want to just type in, Brooke?
Hi, Emma.
Hi, Brooke.
Hello. So that report is obviously very comprehensive. I don't even really am convinced by my own question, but just being able to draw links between different data findings, so an example of mental health hospitalizations, prevalence of that according to rental properties or education level, and just being able to make those linkages. How might that be possible?
I think that's I understand why it's hard to formulate the question. I think that's just how our mind works, right? We see one thing, we see another thing, and we think, are these two related? And I think the bulk of the sort of the analysis I've done within this tool is going, hang on a minute. So, at one point I was like, suicides and mental health hospitalizations don't appear to correlate. It seems that in places people go to hospital all the time, they are committing suicide less. So, so then you sort of go down the rabbit sort of warren of, okay, let's look at this everywhere. Is there, we pull our GP appointment data up. Is this related to it? Is it that hospitals aren't available? And then actually when I did compare, I got the source data and ran it, there wasn't a correlation. So it wasn't the kind of the resounding finding that I expected. But I think that's what we want people to do, to sort of say, firstly you say, okay, I see my community and I see that it's like this, and you say, oh, it's very high in this and very low in that. Are these two things related? And one of the ways we can look at whether two things are related is to look at those two variables in all the other locations as well.
Okay, thank you. And so that basically that's possible to look at two things within the tool?
So the way you do that is through the dashboard. Mm-hmm. So let's just flick across to the dashboard. So the dashboard's sort of like an easy way to do it. So let's say we wanted to look at, children who are developmentally vulnerable, and the prevalence of new start allowance, and to go, are these things high together, low together. But to do a full-on investigation, you'd need to, just a minute. I'll come out in a minute. Sorry. You'd need to run all the data. I'm very sorry. It appears that I'll come and talk to you in a second. Looks like school's out. Sorry. So to do a full-on investigation, it's easiest done through a spreadsheet. But that's also, if you ever come across anything like that, that is something that you can flick over to me and I'll have a look at.
Thank you.
So where are we? Teresa, do you want to just, I'm pretty sure you're looking at digital access in terms of internet access. Is that right? Do you want to just ask that question? Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at Andrew Ward's question. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. So with additional data sets, there's two ways you can upload data. You can upload address data. To get a higher accuracy, longitude and latitude data is good. Those data upload as points on the map. But if you have data that has postcode, suburb, a column of postcodes or a column of suburb, you can upload those as a heat map. So there's two ways to sort of view location data. And so I guess it depends on whether you want to see things as a community, in which case you'd sort of upload sort of as a suburb, postcode, a geographical area for a heat map. And that format is much more forgiving than if you're uploading the specific point, in which case you need an address, and sometimes we lose a few.
Thank you. I thought as much. Also, congratulations, really great tool. I look forward to maybe wondering whether you've done this yourselves, but stuff like startupstatus.co, Chad Renando's got a huge data set there about startup activity around Australia through various formats. And there's a really great active table that I'm trying to find again while we're talking, which is all the co-ops and mutuals and member-owned organisations and B Corps around Australia. I'd love to see, for the people like myself, there was somebody else earlier who's trying to look at community developments and the assets and the activities. Some of those might be really interesting.
I'd love to throw those up there. So in terms of new data sets, we rely on this kind of, this is how we find them. So please, when you find those, Wardy, just if you can email them through or pop them through to me on LinkedIn, that would be amazing. Because this is how we learn what people are publishing.
There's some real interest here about digital inclusion and there it is. Cross-referencing digital inclusion with some of this other data. And that's come from Teresa and Kelly, I think.
Hang on, sorry, is that digital inclusion data?
Yes. Teresa, are you there? Can you perhaps unmute?
Oh, the Australian Digital Inclusion Index?
Yeah, I've seen the report for that one that looks at like digital inclusion across Australia, but I don't know if there's a data set that corresponds with it. I assume there must be. So yeah, I'm just wondering if you, I was also wondering if that's something that you've come across, or
I haven't. I am writing it down, and I'll look into it. What we do have is we have whether households are connected or not. So if I just pop across to that Rivervale report, and oh, here we go, digital services. Oh, that's not what I want. I can see here that when we're looking in Rivervale, I've got 776 dwellings that do not have internet. Hang on, no, that's 2011. I'm down to 632 dwellings without internet at the moment. So that is in the report. It's also in the maps. But I'm not sure. I imagine the Digital Inclusion Index contains a lot more than whether or not you can get internet from your dwelling. So I look forward to checking that one out and seeing whether it's got something we can upload. Thank you. Sorry, Teresa, was that your question, or did you have something else?
Yeah, she's just piped up in chat and said that was her question. She thought it might be useful in terms of COVID. And that she shares an office and can't really unmute because there's lots of noise.
I understand.
So has anyone got anything else? So Emma Fuller's just asking, did you use commercial software to produce the maps or custom made?
The maps are based on Google Maps. The tool itself is a translation of a tool that was developed in the UK. So what originally happened was there were a lot of housing associations having a conference all talking about how data was the future, but none of them were actually using any data or had the literacy to access the data that they wanted. So they, a statistics organisation sort of got them together and said, look, you know, if we can get a sort of a working group of 8 to 12 of you in a room, let's design from the ground up and say, you know, if you could have all the data that you imagine you want, what sets would you include and what would the interface look like? And they came up with this mapping interface. And then when I saw it, I was just like, oh, I have been spending months combing through data, trying to target, you know, like trying to figure out sort of what impact we could make in different communities, how much we could move the needle on indicators, what indicators were available. And then once we had that, trying to understand the communities that we might put services into to tailor them to those communities. And I was like, if I had this tool, I was like, I just need this tool. I need it in Australia. I need it to exist. If I had it, I could do all of that, you know, in the first hour and then start on the really interesting questions, which are, now that we have all this information, what do we do with it? And what does it mean for the services we're planning? So sorry, that's a bit of the history.
So if there's no other questions, cognizant of everyone's time, we might draw a line under it there. Just as an FYI, the way we normally bring on people that are looking at using the platform is through a demo, an in-person demo, or a one-on-one Zoom one, so to kind of do that whole sort of training piece. And Daniel has done a few of those recently, and I think there's been quite some good interest in the last few weeks from different sectors. So if anyone here is interested in getting to know the platform a bit better and having a kind of test run of it, let us know. We will actually make it available to you for new subscribers on this call till the end of June, I think. Emma, is that kosher?
Yes.
Very good. So the way to get in touch with us is you can either reply to that registration email that went out yesterday, or get us at team@impactseed.org. Or if you know Daniel, myself, or Kylie or Emma's details, you can feel free to get in touch with any of us individually. So, yeah.
Daniel has popped the email address up, and there it is on this slide. So
SASEC, oh, that's great.
You can see the team.
Just as an aside, one of the pieces that we've been working on is the development of the West Australian Social Enterprise Council, and collaborating with some of the other emerging social enterprise councils across the country. And I see Teresa's from the South Australian Social Enterprise Council. So thanks for coming, Teresa. And thank you to everybody for coming. Thanks very much. And we hope to see you in person very soon, now that the restrictions look like they're being lifted. And look forward to chatting with you some more if you're interested in access to the platform. Thank you.
Great. Bye, everyone. Please don't hesitate to get in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks.